because I'm going to read 6 pages. So we'll see whether or not that ends up being 15 minutes. So, yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me to read with you today.
Thank you for reading. I appreciate it.
Thanks to all of you. This was really great today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me too. I don't want to be let down.
No,
Thank you,
no.
Sumiko.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
It was a circular all of you.
Okay, so basically, I'm reading from the same book, and this is a couple passages that have to do with Flynn going into the hospital and him meeting Charlotte Metaxas, who is a demigoddess in this story, by the name of Happiness. Happiness is actually her goddess name, but her human name was Charlotte Metaxas. So let's see, what am I doing? Commentary. Nyx was impatiently waiting for an answer. Plot and scheme, her son Thanatos, the god of death, protested. We would never. Settle down, brother, Somnus interrupted. Mother, it is not his fault. I know what you speak of. It is the work of my son, Brash, and his children. They've grown unusually bloodthirsty. As of late, I apologize for their behavior. Ah, his mother said. I am aware of what you speak of, and I appreciate your honesty in this matter. It seems Brash and several of his children have been dissatisfied with their rightful place in the underworld, in the Demos Oneroi, and have instead decided to enter the mortal realm and inflict themselves upon the living like some plague or disease. I will speak with them, Somnus reassured her. It has gone beyond that, Nyx warned. They threaten to disrupt the natural order of things and cause a war between myself and those of greater power than even I. I have decided that they must be tested and punished if necessary. How will you test them? Somnus asked. Nyx lifted a burdensome scroll to the table and partially unfurled it, revealing a spot in the middle. It was a map of the Demos Oneroi, the Greco-Roman mythological realm of dreams. She pointed to a tiny spot on the map with the very tip of her slim tapered finger. You see that young man there? She asked, tapping the spot twice. Look closely and you will see him. He is the one begging your granddaughter mercy for his life. I see him, Somnus responded. The fate of the entire line of Brash lies with him, she said. Let's say that mortal is able to persevere. Let's say that he's able to survive for the short span these fragile creatures are intended to live. Perhaps he'll become the progenitor of a bloodline, for offspring are the closest any mortal being comes to immortality. If he's able to thrive, then they shall as well. If not, Thanatos asked a little too eagerly. Being the god of death, he had a pleasant feeling about where this might be going. If not, then, as they so envy the mortals, let them be mortal. Let their endless lives, with which they have become so bored and tired, come to an end. Let them die like all the rest. He is my son, Somnus protested. Surely you will at least allow me to call forth a champion to protect this mortal upon whose fragile shoulders you place such a heavy burden. Very well, Nyx relented after a moment of silent consideration. You may, but you must call forth a champion from your own line. More specifically, this champion should be one of Brash's progeny. To the best of my knowledge, they are cruel, brutal, and irredeemable. But if you have one with whom you might trust such a charge, name him. Her, Somnus corrected. Happiness, I name her. She will protect him. Nyx furrowed her brow. I have not heard this name before. Who is she? She is a demigoddess, Somnus explained. She is the offspring of the most recent dalliance between Brash and a mortal mistress. Nix laughed. You mean a demi-somnali? To be a demigoddess, she would need to be the child of a god, and surely we are not elevating your wayward son Brash to the same status as you or your brother. Very well, Somnus conceded, not wishing to offend his mother. Certain among the thousands of the Oneri were considered to be gods. Morpheus was one of the gods, and Phobator the god of nightmares. For example, Brash would have been the god of erotic nightmares, but he was obscure and had no worshippers. A demi-somnali, as you say. I name her. For their sakes, I hope she's a great deal gentler than her sisters, Thanatos remarked. They've sent many a mortal my way. Therapy. Flynn wished all things therapeutic could be as relaxing and comfortable as a morning shower masturbation. After a year of listening to his bizarre nightmares, Dr. Madeline Lester continued to seem unimpressed. She didn't believe him when he said the dreams were real. She was an older professional woman who was not easily shocked by anything he had to say. When he described what he described as nightmares, she claimed were merely fantasies. She insinuated that he secretly wanted to be some monster's juice box. He wanted the creature to plunge a straw into him and suck him dry. He shifted uneasily in the office chair while he relayed the latest of his strange dreams. Dr. Lester took notes. Okay, she said, when she was done. So, do you think this dream is different than your other dreams? Well, yes, he said, gesturing nervously with his hands. Usually it dopes me up first, but this time it wanted to hurt me. Did you want to be hurt? The doctor asked. Well, no, I didn't want that monster to hurt me, he lied. Look, I don't want to talk about this. That's fine, she said. I respect that. So let's talk about something else. Okay, he said, breathing a sigh of relief. Earlier you told me you hurt yourself this morning, she began. No, he protested. I never said I hurt myself. I said the creature in my dreams hurt me. It scratched the shit out of me. I mean, look at my back. It still hurts, and so do these holes in my neck. He neglected to mention several scrapes and bruises on more private parts of his anatomy. Can you see how this sounds? We both agree it's not real, she reminded him. How could it have hurt you? Therefore, we must conclude that you have hurt yourself, mustn't we? That is so fucked up, he shouted. You're setting me up. If I say yes, you're going to say this is self-harm. And if I say no, you're going to say I'm psychotic or suffering from delusions. It's like no matter what I say, you're going to, you're trying to get me 5150. Do you think you need to be committed and placed on a 3-day psychiatric hold for evaluation? Dr. Lester asked. No, he snapped back. No, of course not. I'm fine. You don't look fine, Doctor. Dr. Lester responded calmly. You look like you haven't been sleeping or eating, and you seem rather agitated. I've been eating, he claimed. It's like I told you. I keep throwing up. Haven't you found anything on the blood tests? You are a little anemic, the doctor explained patiently, but otherwise all of your blood work is fine. So, how are you sleeping? Not very well, he admitted. I'm afraid to sleep. So, you're afraid you'll hurt yourself? She asked. No, I'm afraid that thing is going to hurt me, he repeated. I'm afraid it's going to kill me. It keeps saying it's going to kill me, so of course I'm not sleeping. I'm terrified. As soon as the words left his mouth, Flynn realized his error. Dr. Lester didn't believe there was any creature. She would interpret what he had just said as meaning that he was afraid that he would kill himself. There weren't any mirrors in the office, but he could remember how haggard he looked in the bathroom mirror this morning. He didn't imagine he could look any better right now. He searched in vain for a hint of his own reflection in the shiny surface of the plastic Zoloft advertisement on her desk. Then he spotted her toy with the little metal balls that dangled from chains and clicked against each other, bouncing back and forth when you knocked the first one into the second. He spotted his eye in the nearest steel ball. It looked like a lunar eclipse, or that creepy black circle people saw just before they died in the movie The Ring. Whatever his eye looked like, it did not look good. It looked like a deep, dark pit of despair. "Look," he said quickly, "that didn't sound the way I meant it to. I can see why you might be concerned, though." He was doing his best to sound as sane and reasonable as possible. "Well," Dr. Lester said carefully, "if you are sure you won't be hurting yourself." "I already told you," he shrieked. "I didn't hurt myself. The monster hurt me." He had forgotten all about his plan to stay calm and out of the hospital. Suddenly he remembered, "Look, okay? I won't hurt myself. I'm sorry if I sounded agitated. I'm really just tired." "It's clear you're not sleeping well," she said, leaning her swivel chair back against the desk and picking up the pen that looked like a little conductor's wand. Flynn couldn't take his eyes off the pen. "I think your medications aren't working properly and they need to be adjusted," she continued. "I think a voluntary state of just a few days, at most a week, would be in your best interest. I'm not trying to put you on a 5150 psychiatric hold. I just think that you and I can both agree that you've been having some issues with your self-care. You could use better tools to manage your condition. You might need to get some rest, and we need to get you on the right medication." "But I don't want to miss work," he insisted. "I could lose my job." "You know they can't fire you for that," she said reassuringly. "It would be discrimination. You can't fire someone for being out sick." Flynn sighed in exasperation and shook his head. "If I thought you were a danger to yourself," Dr. Lester reminded him, "I would be forced to put you on an involuntary hold. We don't want that. Don't you think it would be better if we can just agree to get you the help you need before it comes down to that?" He threw his hands up in the air. "Fine," he mumbled in resignation. Okay, so now I'm gonna, how long have I been reading?
Not long enough.
Not long enough, okay. So, now I'm gonna read a little bit about when he's in the hospital and when he meets happiness. So, hospitalization. Everything went fine at first. It was around lunch when they admitted him to the hospital. He surrendered his shoelaces. He slipped on the hospital gown and pants he'd reconciled himself to wearing until they had time to go through the clothes he'd brought along with him. They had to make sure there was nothing in there that he could potentially hang or cut himself with. He had no desire to strangle himself with dirty white tennis shoe laces, but he was still obligated to walk around without any. The tongue dangled listlessly from the front of his black high-top Converse All-Stars. The blue and white patterned hospital gown fastened in the back with a couple of plastic snaps because ties had been adjudged too dangerous for mental patients. The gown was loose on his emaciated frame. The uppermost snap near his neck would not stay shut, and the cloth flapped down, leaving the fresh wounds on his shoulder to peek out accusingly for everyone to see. Flynn felt like a prisoner. The orderlies escorted him to the lunchroom where the other inmates were already seated, eating from their trays. They walked him over to an empty seat at a round table with 4 short benches welded into each side. It resembled the fiberglass outdoor seating at a fast food restaurant. He sat directly across from a large, uncommunicative man in his 30s who gazed out the window between forks full of chicken parmigiana. On one side of him was a black woman in her early 50s, and on the other, a Latino girl who appeared to be in her late teens. It seemed as though the crazies affected people of every age, race, and gender. The woman was chipping away at what was supposed to be beef Wellington, while the girl picked at a rice pilaf dish that he supposed was the vegetarian option. He guessed there was a fish choice as well. "Do you have any special dietary needs?" asked the cafeteria lady, who approached with the nub of a pencil and 2 paper menus. "You can select your meal choices for tomorrow and for dinner tonight," he explained, placing the menus beside him. "But I am afraid we can only offer you the chicken or vegetarian plates for lunch. You have arrived so close to the end of lunch that these are all we have left." "The chicken would be lovely, mademoiselle," he said with a grin. "Oh, we have a comedian at the table," the older woman said with grumpy affection. "Glad to see you haven't lost your sense of humor yet." He nodded appreciatively. "Thank you." "You will," she assured him. "You can only watch Wheel of Fortune in the day room so many times in a row before you go catatonic like Gary over there." She gestured towards the big man. He liked her sense of humor, dry and dark. The young girl at their table seemed more alert than poor Gary, who was either very psychiatric or over-medicated or possibly both. She didn't exhibit any interest in talking to either of them, however. She vacillated between staring at the crumbling remains of her pink nail polish and a boy her age with a shaggy bowl cut 2 tables over. "My name is Flynn," he said, holding his hand out to his most amusing table mate. "My name is Lorena," she said with a nod, ignoring the hand. "I'm not going to touch your hand, young man. I'm married, and I've been here long enough, been here enough times to know how these little institutional romances get started." Flynn laughed. He was 26 years old. She was old enough to be his mother. In fact, since he was the result of a teenage pregnancy, his own mother was almost certainly younger than Lorena. Lorena was a handsome woman, though. He did not doubt that she had her fair share of suitors among the inpatients. In fact, judging by the dirty look Gary was giving him, she probably had one at this very table. "I'm not hitting on you, Lorena," he reassured her. "I'm no homewrecker. You're a married woman." Gary narrowed his eyes. "Thank you very much," she replied. 32 years now, but I've been in here a few times lately. It's hard when you get to a certain age and your parents start having health problems. That's how I ended up here the first time, 3 years ago. My dad died. There's nothing wrong with getting some help, so don't feel ashamed of what you're going through. I'm going through menopause. That'll make you crazy right there." She winked. He laughed a little. "Yeah, I remember when my mom went through it." "I'm not that old," Marina said huffily. "I mean, your mom. My kids are still in high school. You look like you're pushing 30, and don't you dare call me ma'am." "No, ma'am, sir, no, sir, I won't." Flynn decided to quit while he was still ahead. He stuffed his face full of chicken before he could alienate his one and only friend in this place. He'd been in the hospital 2 or 3 times before, and he never seemed to make friends easily here, or anywhere for that matter. She made him laugh, and that was very good. Flynn began to feel self-conscious about the bags under his eyes. He'd slept less than 5 hours in the past 3 days. Did he really look like he was 30? The chicken had been expectedly bland, but unexpectedly delicious. He hadn't realized it until that very moment, but he was starving. So this is going to be the last passage I read, and this one's called Television. And this is where he meets happiness. After lunch, they dispensed the noon medications. He didn't get any because Dr. Lester was weaning him off the ones he was on now so she could transition him onto the new ones. He was informed that he would still get his night meds. While the others were in line for their medicine, a nurse escorted him to his room, showed him which bed he would be sleeping in, and handed him a hospital bag with a few approved items of clothing. He slipped off the gown and pulled on his old Final Fantasy XII t-shirt. It smelled like fabric softener and innocence. Putting it on gave him pleasure. It reminded him of happier days before the nightmares. He wished he was still in college, going to conventions with his friend Danny, who moved out of town to take a job with some startup in Palo Alto 5 years ago. Those were carefree days before he started having problems and dropped out of school. I'm going to stop for a second. That just reminds me that this character lives in Vallejo, and there's a whole passage about Vallejo in here that I probably should have read but didn't. So, and I don't think you've gotten to that part.
I did read that.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay. Admitting that he had any kind of mental problem before the nightmares began troubled him, and Flynn quickly put it out of his mind. He still wore the hospital pants, baggy and uncomfortable. He tried to kick off the Converse and put on the hospital slipper socks. He wasn't going outside, so why bother wearing shoes? He didn't want to be alone with his thoughts anymore. Flynn padded down the hall to the television room and sat down in one of the big green easy chairs. It wasn't as comfortable as the overstuffed brown plaid chair his dad used to have in the living room. Dad's chair was plush and soft like a sofa cushion. This chair was made out of cold plastic that would stick to the back of your legs if you had shorts on. The kind of material that was easy to sponge down if one of the patients had an accident. Something's going on out there.
Yeah.
Should I keep reading with the whole medical med alert ambulance
Mine's gonna have
situation?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Go make sure mom is on.
Yeah, make sure mom's okay.
She's okay.
She's fine, okay.
She walked down
This is very strange.
It's bigger than the fire truck, something's going on.
Okay, so if things start burning, can somebody like alert me? Because I don't want to keep reading if the building's on fire. or
We will
anything.
tell you.
Thank you.
And if you hear shooting, crawl toward the.
Crawl to the back, okay,
Yeah.
cool. Flynn tried not to think about how many people might have defecated or urinated on themselves in this very chair over the years. He leaned back to kick his feet up in the air and was a little disappointed by how low the footrest remained at its highest point. He wasn't worried about that for long. After a little while, he became drowsy. He was in a room full of people. Some of them were drawing or coloring with art supplies, and a few were playing with the board games Scrabble and Monopoly. Most of the people were watching an old rerun of 2.5 Men from back when Charlie Sheen was on it. He felt very safe here. He was almost asleep when a woman's voice disrupted the flow of his growing reverie. "You like games?" she chirped. "I like playing games." She was leaning right over his head. Flynn bolted upright in his chair. The footrest snapped down and this goth chick stepped back a little to avoid being hit by his face when the back of the chair straightened up. He looked at her. "Whoa, damn girl, you scared me." "I'm sorry about that. I'm Charlotte," she said, extending her hand. Flynn reached out to shake it, completely forgetting Lorena's warning about hospital romances. Charlotte took his hand and kissed it the way knights and debonair European cats kiss women's hands in movies. "I think guys are supposed to do that," he blurted out. Stunned, he quickly pulled back his hand and cradled it in his other one as though she'd mortally wounded it. "Who cares about supposed to?" she asked. Not understanding the rhetorical nature of the question, Flynn opened his mouth to answer it, but Charlotte cut him off before he could get a word in edgewise. "So Final Fantasy," she said. "I like that game. I've played 10 through 13 too. 12 was the best one," Flynn said, relieved for a change of topic. "I like other games too," she said suggestively. He swallowed nervously and began looking around the room for some kind of reprieve. Shades of the dream began to creep in the periphery of his consciousness. For a moment he thought that the people were looking at him like the co-workers in his dream. But no one was looking. Everyone was staring at the TV or whatever else they were busy with, or they were just staring out at nothing. Some people were talking to each other. Gary was still staring at Lorena, and the girl from his table was still staring at that boy, and Charlotte was staring at him, waiting for him to say something. She was a pretty girl with a wicked smile and little dots in her ears and nose, and under her lip where piercings would have been if she weren't standing in the middle of a psych ward. He imagined that they forced her to take them out. He suddenly registered the fact that none of the other women were wearing earrings or necklaces. He wondered if any of her piercings would close when she was hidden here. He noticed that her hair was dyed purple. She was in her early 20s and old enough to go to a nightclub. 22 or 3 was his guess. Like what kinds of games, he asked. Do you like first-person shooters or do you only like RPGs? I do like first-person shooters, she said. I also like role-playing games. All kinds of role-playing games. The ones I like most are not played on a computer or a gaming system. You mean you like board games? He asked, feigning innocence. He knew what she was talking about. He began to feel a little warm. She stood behind his chair, leaned over him again, and whispered, I saw those marks on your back when we first came in here, and I just wanted to let you know that you don't have to hurt yourself. I could do it for you. Would you like that? He felt every hair on his arm begin to rise as he turned his head to look up at her. Stop that, girl, Lorena interrupted. You're about to embarrass that boy publicly. She looked right at Charlotte and winked at her. Charlotte smirked. The two seemed to know each other. Flynn hastily sat up and arranged his hands on his lap in such a way as to conceal the source of his public embarrassment. He wasn't able to do so before Charlotte took notice, though. Satisfied, she turned around and walked away. See, Lorena said, now you've got a hospital girlfriend. Don't say I didn't warn you. Have fun with that. Do you know her? He asked. Lorena laughed. I know her mother a whole lot better than I know that child. But that girl is a grown woman, so whatever is trying to happen between you two is none of my business. I need to get some rest, he said quickly, trying to change the subject. He really was tired, though. He hadn't been sleeping lately, but suddenly he was totally exhausted. Best not to do that in the recreation room, Lorena told him. It's filled with crazy people. You don't want a bunch of wingnuts watching you sleep. Some of them might get the wrong idea. Okay, he agreed. I'll go to my room. I'm allowed to do that, right? Until group, she said. That's at 3, so you have an hour. If you don't want that girl following you in there, you better close the door. He nodded and got up to leave. Lorena smiled knowingly. He was halfway down the hall by the time she returned her attention to the sitcom at hand. Okay, so I think that's it. Thank you for coming.
Thanks again, everybody, for coming and for reading and for being here and for the food.
Yeah, thank you
Watching
guys.
the fire truck.
Okay.
Going through the employee-only door.
Oh, yeah.
That's a first.
Not for me, that's my kind of thing I do all the time.
Yeah, he's a bad dude in this thing. One of my books is gone. Can someone buy it?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
someone
good. Yeah, she basically said that she was gonna make him mortal. But I don't think she actually threatened them. So.
That was my next question.
But yeah, he's a bad guy in there. Thank you. You know you guys are gonna appreciate having this. This is gonna be like 3 shows. Yeah, I think Halloween would be
Okay, here's one.
with you guys.
Next slide.
Horror writers and Halloween.
This idea of a book fair, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, it is a good idea.